Salutations, listeners. See you, Alice Valeo.
Valamagulus.
Nanu.
Thank you for tuning in. This is Three Men in a Basement, and we are the Ultra Crepidarians. My name is Colin McLeod.
Marco Pierre.
Action Jackson.
And in this podcast, we review movies, and we deliver to you, the listener, an average schmuck's opinion about hidden gems in the wide world of cinema. We try and target movies that are not total blockbuster smashes. They're not busting any blocks.
Not quite obscure.
Yeah, not a Star Wars. We also aim for movies that aren't super duper obscure, ones that you could probably get your hands on a copy either through a streaming service or maybe at your local library, but we're not...
Gotta love the library.
Oh man, support your local libraries, and if you don't listen to our podcast. Fuck you.
Yep.
Wow. I went hard.
No, I second that.
I will die on the hill of supporting my local library.
If you don't like libraries, I don't like you.
Yeah, that's...
Now I want to take an anti-library stance just to be an asshole.
Don't you dare.
Do it. See what happens.
I hate libraries. I hate libraries. There's so many books. Do you know how many pages there are? Hundreds. There's hundreds of pages.
Usually there's about a dozen pages because pages are the people that stock the books on the shelves.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about those pages.
Yeah, two of your sisters worked in libraries. Get educated.
Which sisters?
You get your education.
Alyssa and Megan.
Very well. Okay, so you were saying?
So, we review these movies that are at your local library, and we deliver to you our opinion about whether or not you need to go to your local library, punch Mark in the face on the way over, and then watch it, review it, and tell us how much you liked it. So, in this week's episode, we reviewed the movie...
A Whale Rider.
Whale Rider.
I had never heard of this movie before.
I have seen this movie probably 2 or 3 times, but honestly, I don't think I've seen this movie since at least 2010. So it's been a good 10, 12 years.
I think this is the first episode that I've ever done where I've seen a movie more than both of you combined.
How many times?
At least 4 prior to tonight. So on the low end, today would be 5.
Wow. That sounds like it could be almost 6.
It could almost be 6.
That's amazing.
Maybe even 7.
Don't you go there.
And that's math. And you can get math books at your local library.
At your local library.
I don't have a problem with libraries, guys, okay? I'm just taking a devil's advocate position, okay? I'm trying to be an asshole.
We will never let Mark forget
they
about
got books
his...
and shit, sometimes they got video games and, who doesn't like a video game?
Who doesn't like a video game?
At a library for learning.
Good old Mavis Beacon.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
So,
maybe bacon.
So Whale
Maybe
Rider.
bacon.
What kind of movie is this?
Yeah. So Whale Rider, 2002 movie, rated PG-13. Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Maybe. Could have been PG, I think.
You're right. I think it could have been PG. It's a very soft PG-13 in that it doesn't contain anything explicit.
Why does it even get that 13?
The cigarette.
You're probably right. It probably is the cigarette, and then also...
The singular, the one cigarette.
One cigarette.
It's also, the concepts are kind of, I think would be challenging for a younger viewer. Even though nothing is, explicit, I don't think I would probably, expect this to hold the attention of a younger viewer.
Yeah, but,
But you're right. The rating shouldn't reflect that. But I think you're right. The cigarette, there are some calls to violence kind of thing, but it's, sort of set in a cultural context. I don't know. It's...
If this were PG, I wouldn't bat an eye.
No, I agree. You're right. Okay, so, rated PG-13, it's definitely a soft PG-13.
Yeah.
An hour and 41 minutes?
I'd say that's accurate. I mean, it's kind of a slow movie. Not that it drags on, but all of the scenes are very... they take their time.
It's very intentional.
Yes.
I agree. I think it's right on the nose.
I felt like this was longer than it actually was.
I feel like if it were any longer, then it would have been too long.
Yeah, and me saying that it felt longer than it really was, I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy it. I truly did. But I think just the way it's crafted, when you finish the movie, you feel like you've been watching it for a while. I don't know. There wasn't a point where I was done with it. But no, while I did feel like this was longer than maybe the timestamp would indicate, I was engaged the whole time.
There are movies that I've watched where I'm that felt long, but I still really enjoyed it. So I get what you're coming from. I don't think this is an example of that necessarily from my own perspective, but I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. What genre would you throw this thing into?
So IMDb has it as drama family.
Bare bones, but accurate.
Yeah, drama for sure.
Yeah.
Family, yes, but I feel like family in this context is like... I feel like family is typically like, hey, let's like, get the kids together and we'll all watch a family movie together and we'll watch, Dumbo or like...
yeah, I don't think this would be good for a family.
No, but I feel like family here is maybe being like used as a surrogate for like culturalist. Like I feel like there are some movies that part of what they do, part of their thing is that they help people to experience and get exposure to another culture, typically a culture that they are like, as of yet unfamiliar with. And I think this fits the bill perfectly, and I feel like maybe when they're saying family, that's what they're trying to get at.
And in this context, I feel like the word family is almost redundant, but only from the perspective of what the culture is. Because, I mean, the group of people that this movie is focused on is all about family in a much broader sense than, Americans know the nuclear family to be. Like, my family, your family, his family.
There's a broader sense of family that's displayed in this movie.
Exactly. So for it to say, it's a family drama, it's like, yeah, but like everybody that was in this movie was considered family from the characters itself.
Mm-hmm. A community.
Yeah.
Community, a tribe. Do we feel like there's anything missing?
I personally don't. Like, this was not a comedy. This was not an action. This was not a fantasy. In my opinion, this was drama at its best, in that there were many moments in this movie where I was livid. I was infuriated at what was going on. And not in a, like, we need to turn this off kind of sense, but, like, in a, I need to see how this situation, like, resolves itself, because, like, I'm really upset with what is going on.
No, I agree 100%. I don't think there's any other labels that would really fit this movie, just because of what it is. I mean, it is a tried and true drama.
So like going back to, like, I'm sorry, but like Reign Over Me, or
yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot we did that. That's a good.
It's like drama in like its purest form.
Yeah.
So
and like Reign Over Me had a lot of laughable moments and quotable lines and stuff, but at its core, it was 100% drama, and
so
there's
heavy.
really no getting around that particular label. And this movie didn't even have the fun, laughable, like,
it wasn't
levity.
Yeah.
No.
And I think, like, sort of building on that, I'm going to segue real quick into saying that, like, there's not a lot of levity in this movie. Like they were saying, it's very dramatic. It's also very much about a specific culture. And we on this podcast really like to bring the levity and find some fun shit. So, I always feel like I need to give this disclaimer when a movie is really serious, like when we're doing Reign Over Me or Jacob the Liar or something like that. I always feel like I need to say, like, we're going to be having fun with it and we're going to be joking and laughing and jovial. But that doesn't mean, we're laughing at the movie, and it doesn't mean that we don't, take the content seriously. We just, for you, the listening audience, we like to present a fun time, and we like to have a fun time on the podcast, too. And just because a movie's serious doesn't mean, the three goofballs sitting in the basement don't have to be serious. So I always feel like throwing out that disclaimer, just in case somebody gets their knickers in a twist later in the episode when they're like, they're laughing through a very serious scene, and it's like, we understand and respect and appreciate that it's a serious scene, and we took it as serious when we were watching it, and we hold that in our hearts. But also, you come to Three Men in a Basement for a whole bunch of dick and fart jokes. So
I for one am very glad that we watched a dramatic and heavy movie tonight, because I cracked a rib today, and let's just say that if I was laughing really hard, I'd probably be in the ER right now.
Yeah, guy hasn't laughed at all.
Nope.
He has been just stone-faced.
Yep.
Yeah. But just piggybacking off of that,
you gonna piggyback on me right now?
I'm gonna piggyback on you.
I'm feeling Mark's schlong in the small of my back.
I would watch that.
He's
graphic.
He has piggied on my back.
That's graphic. No, but it's not even like the content of this movie was like heavy in the same way that like a Reign Over Me was,
or Jacob the Liar.
Blech.
It's more like it felt like a personal. I don't know, like a periscope into another culture or another life. And me having absolutely no reference points to base upon, I felt like the cultural illustrations that were presented in this movie were taken quite seriously. So, you know, given my limited exposure to this particular culture, it's heavy in a way that is like just fascinating and very interesting to me. And it's heavy in a family context. There's a lot of like personal, like universally relatable friction that is presented in this movie that anyone can relate to. But we're not dealing with trauma in the same way that some of the other movies that we have talked about do. Not that this movie doesn't have its intense beats to it, but the seriousness within which we try to approach this particular movie is more about wanting to be respectful to nuances that we are not as familiar with, or at least that I'll just say that I am not as familiar with.
I feel like Mark started where I was at,
and
then went to be like, we're going to be respectful, and I was like, I think I led with like, yeah, but we're still going to be making dick and fart jokes.
Well, I'm not saying
respectful dick and fart jokes.
Respectful dick and fart jokes.
Dignified. This is a dignified, phallical situation.
One might say dignified.
Dignified. There we go. We had to get it in there. You know, you came to Three Men in a Basement for the dick joke. You got it. All right.
This is dignity at its finest.
There. All right.
So what's our IMDb description?
Okay, our IMDb description. So a contemporary story of love, rejection, and triumph. As a young Maori girl fights to fulfill a destiny her grandfather refuses to recognize.
That's pretty good.
That's tight.
Yeah. I feel like...
I endorse it.
Even though I don't feel like this movie has a whole bunch that would be ruined by knowing more, I feel like that's a really good sort of lead in. I'm perfectly happy leaving it at that.
Like, I could think of a couple more descriptive summations to this movie, but again, if you care about spoilers at all, this really isn't a movie that you can spoil very well.
Yeah.
No, it's...
Because it's all about the content and experience rather than the actual plot.
I agree. Wholeheartedly.
Okay, so who directed this movie, Mark?
This was Nikki, I'm going to say Caro.
Caro?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with their other work.
She did a lot, it looks like. I did not know this, but McFarland USA, that was a big movie. Mulan, the new live-action Mulan.
Mm-hmm.
Take that for what it's worth.
I have not seen it, so...
Zookeeper's Wife. That did well.
Yeah, Anne with an E. That was a big one. The reiteration of Anne of Green Gables.
Oh, I did not see that. Is that good?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, it's one of those adaptations where if you like the original story, you're probably not going to like this one. But it is one of those, like, this is my interpretation of Anne of Green Gables kind of productions. It's a lot darker.
Okay, so who do we have in this movie?
Well...
Probably no one you've heard of.
There's a couple, maybe, but...
So the main character is Keisha Castle-Hughes. And the one thing that you would probably not know that you've seen that she was in was Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. She played the Queen of Naboo.
Didn't we all?
I mean, at least once.
She's an amazing actress.
She is.
I think I would argue probably the biggest actor in this movie, or at least the one with the most
clout.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of Cliff Curtis?
Yeah, Cliff Curtis. He was in Sunshine, Training Day, Avatar: The Way of Water. This is very recent. You've definitely seen him. He was in Dr. Sleep, Fast and Furious. I think of all of the actors in this particular movie, he has kind of...
He's in a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he's bubbled up.
He's definitely that guy that, like, you might not know him by name, but you know him by face.
Yeah.
He is fucking everywhere.
Dude, his character in The Meg was great.
Oh, that's right, he was in The Meg.
Yeah. You and I actually went to see that in theaters.
Yeah, we did.
That was at the Canton Cinema.
R.I.P. But who else was in this?
So you have...
And I guess, to be fair, real quick, I'm sorry. Cliff Curtis, while he played a critical role, he was far from the headliner.
Yeah.
But looking at his catalog, I feel like I know why. So, like, Cliff Curtis, again, I know his face, and I know him from a bunch of shit, but, like, a lot of his stuff actually came before 2002.
Right.
So, in some ways, oftentimes you want, like, a big name or a bigger name attached to your project to sort of elevate it a little bit, and they can have an important, but admittedly, like, low-frequency role
Yeah.
that can sort of catapult the thing, but allow the other actors and actresses to sort of, flourish and show what they can do.
He's worth the price of admission, and then sacrifices his screen time to other players.
And he's amazing in what he does, but you're right, that's a guy, yeah. The other actress that a lot of people will know, and she's amazing, and she works a lot with Taika Waititi, is Rachel House.
Yeah.
So I did not know that she plays Grandma Tala in Moana.
Yeah, buddy.
It's hard, unless somebody has a really unique voice, it can be kind of difficult to peg somebody, from just voice. But she was in Hunt for the Wilder People, which was directed by Taika Waititi. She plays the police officer that tries to track the kid down.
She was in Thor?
So
she was in Ragnarok.
She plays the assistant to the Grand Master, who hands him the talisman that he melts that guy with. Remember? And
No way.
Oh yeah. And Thor Ragnarok was also directed by Taika Waititi. So she is often attached to his projects. Partially because Taika Waititi is
also Maori.
He's also Maori. He's a Kiwi, and he likes to employ Maori and or
indigenous peoples.
Well, indigenous peoples, but not just Maori, but other New Zealanders as well. Basically, I think if you're a up and coming New Zealand actor, and he likes to promote from within, as it were, right? Which is awesome because we've got a lot of really awesome New Zealand talent. Yeah. I think exclusively because he caught his break. He didn't forget about his roots. He didn't forget about where he came from. And actually, same with Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
Right? Another Kiwi that hit it big, and he really fought hard for New Zealand actors and actresses to be in his projects and to elevate what he does. And I really respect both of those directors for what they've done.
I think the last one worth mentioning is Rawiri Paratene. He plays Koro, which is the grandfather in the movie. Not a well-known actor. He's been in a couple of things, but he was in Man-Thing, Golden Boy, and The Auckland Days. 3 movies.
You say Man-Thing?
Man-Thing. Yeah, it's a relatively recent project. Came out in, well, not super recent. I mean,
so we promised dick and fart jokes, and I feel like you're kind of glossing over Man-Thing.
Yeah, yeah. Man-Thing was 2005. They found...
What did they find? Tell me what they found.
They found a Man-Thing.
Oh, they found a Man-Thing.
What's a Man-Thing?
It's so it's a DC character. Man-Thing.
Okay, you're trending in the wrong direction here.
Yeah.
They found a penis in the woods.
Yeah, in the swamp.
In the swamp. And hey, let's not judge where it's been, right?
We've all had swamp ass, but ow. Fuck.
Who hasn't found a penis in the swamp?
You know what? That's true. I mean, that's kind of you go into a swamp, you find a penis. I mean, that's just
right.
That's science.
I'm sorry.
Too loud and it hurt. Okay.
Oh, he went too loud and it hurt.
Okay.
That's what they say. So yeah, I'm trying to imagine this scene in Man-Thing where they find the penis and they pick it up and they say, "It's a man-thing."
Yep.
It's probably like an Excalibur-esque moment.
You can only pick it up
out of the mud
if you are the chosen one.
Yeah.
What does the chosen one have to do, though?
You don't.
I mean, like in Arthurian lore, you got to be the king of England.
This is not.
If you pull a dick out of the swamp, what do you get? This is not a
direction that we're going to head on this podcast. Okay?
I feel like we have to.
No.
What do you get? What do you get?
No, we're not talking about it.
You get gonorrhea is what you get.
That's rough.
I traipsed deep into the swamps of penicillin.
That's a sassy bitch. So,
into the chlamydial swamps.
Oh, I fucking hate you.
It's funny because he actually broke his rib today, so he's in pain. That's a real that you just heard, ladies and gentlemen. So if you can do your best, Jackson, to pull yourself out of your debilitating pain and just answer this very simple question.
Yeah.
Unsheath your Trojan rubber of justice.
Would you
march into that swamp?
Would you recommend this movie? I just want you to peer through the pain for just a moment because my question takes priority over your body.
Over your body.
This is dark because it's real. He did break his rib today, and I'm a bad friend.
I would absolutely and have on oh fuck.
He's in pain, guys. It's funny.
I would absolutely and have on multiple occasions recommended this movie to people, and I would again.
Yeah. What about you, Colin?
I recommend the shit out of this movie. It would never stop me from recommending it. However, I think I would tell people, kind of like what you were saying, Mark, like, you know, it's a drama and it goes at its own pace, but it is an enjoyable film to watch. It is still engaging, and it is eye-opening is the wrong term, because that's like revealing something that you didn't
not privy to.
Yeah, it's more like illuminating, right? It provides an amazingly detailed snapshot of at least part of Maori culture and history. And it's always fun and interesting and enjoyable to see aspects of culture woven into film with intentionality. You know, like the cultural aspects of this film, they weren't a gimmick. They weren't something that was put in to try and boost the film. It was the film, and it was awesome. Like, it was cool to be sort of immersed in it.
Yeah. I also would recommend this movie, and I love my caveats. You have to be in the mindset for a drama, I suppose. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of people out there who don't have the attention spans to maybe properly appreciate what this is.
Maybe the same people who don't support their local libraries.
I feel like that. No. Well, I feel like
you can't see it. Jackson's giving me his support, but he's doing it silently.
Given the devil's advocate position that I took, being anti-library, which I am not, ladies and gentlemen.
I have an uncle library, but I don't have an anti-library.
God damn it.
You don't have an anti-library?
No.
I love libraries. They're great.
That's what he says.
But I will take up the argument that they're terrible.
I dare you to prove it.
If it makes for interesting conversation. I'll do that. God damn it. No.
Show me your library card, fuck.
Yeah, you just revel in that pain. But
Mark doesn't even have to argue, because Jackson's body's going to defeat him.
That's right. I win.
I can't even fight because my body's fighting me.
Yeah, it's a win for me.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. No, this was a really good movie. Like, honestly, it was upsetting in like the best ways. You know, like when a movie pisses you off, it's doing something right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And like there were times in this movie where I was like just angry at what was happening, and you know, it didn't make me want to turn it off. It made me want to keep watching because I wanted to see how those things resolve themselves. This is, I think, in my opinion, drama at its best.
At its most goodest, if you will.
Most goodest.
Most goodest.
Are we ready to blah 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 blah? Blah.
Spoilers, baby.
Spoilers.
Spoilers.
So we're in spoiler territory.
What?
How do we feel about that?
I feel pretty good about that. I like spoilers.
Ooh.
So this movie, I think it's going to be...
I think we can actually go through the nuts and bolts of this movie pretty quick, to be honest.
Yeah. I think most of this movie, it's not that there was like long, awkward pauses, but like the weight of this movie is in like the interpersonal dynamics of it. And that'll be difficult for us to like effectively articulate.
Yeah. Or we could just do it in like a sentence, even though it's sort of drawn out through an entire movie, you know, on screen kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So this movie opens with...
The birth.
Yeah, so there's a sort of like voiceover by the lead actress, and she's sort of describing the history of her people and Paikia, who was a mythical figure who rode a whale to New Zealand from the lands of the Ancient Ones, Hawaii, and rode onto the shores of New Zealand and helped found the first Maori tribes. Telling this story while it keeps cutting back and forth between sort of like underwater images of...
The whale.
Huh?
Of the whale.
Of the whale, as Casanova Frankenstein would say. And a woman giving birth. And basically the narration sort of ends with... It's a woman's voice. It's like I said, it's the female lead in the movie saying, "My twin brother died when we were born, and he took my mother with him," which is an extremely heavy way to open a movie.
Oh my god.
Yeah, talk about burying the lead. I mean, she's just talking about how she lost her twin brother and her mother in one fell swoop the day she was born.
And at the same time, her grandfather is completely dismissing her as an infant and is far more concerned about, not to dismiss it, but he's lamenting the loss of her twin brother more than acknowledging her entry into the world.
It was such a soft way to put it. Like, he was a fucking monster. Like, he literally came into the room where everybody is is standing around mourning the death of this mother and child, goes up to his son, who is the father, and says, "Where's the boy?" He knows that his daughter-in-law is dead, and he just goes, "Where's the boy?"
Yeah.
And then he and his son go out into the hallway. They have some words. His son more or less tells him to fuck off.
And his son says, "Her name's Paikia."
He won't accept that.
And Koro, the grandfather Koro, he's like, "No, anything but that name. That you can't go with that name. Anything but that."
Because there was a sort of a tradition, an idea that Paikia, the mythical figure who was the sort of progenitor of at least their Maori tribe and others likely, would be sort of born again and save the Maori people. And so they were looking for a male, a specifically male firstborn to sort of lead them to salvation, to save the culture, to save the people. And so the fact that he was convinced it was going to be the boy that was Paikia, the boy dies, and then his son names the girl twin Paikia instead, set the grandfather off pretty heinously. And then the grandmother, who is exceedingly nurturing, the grandfather is kind of like mourning over the grandson, who's still, this is a little strange to me, but was still like... still there, like in... You know, like the sort of...
Like he was stillborn and wrapped in like a receiving blanket and put in the...
Like, what do you call those things? Like the clear plastic wheelie gigs.
Basically the bassinet that they give you when your baby is born.
Yeah, they had like a double one.
Yeah.
And it was like the live girl baby in one and the dead boy baby in the other, and they just sort of left them like that.
Yeah.
Which was...
weird.
Very strange, but anyway, so
the part that really triggered me was they put the little baby hat on him.
Yeah, like he was
had his name tag, had the receiving blanket, everything. And I was just like, oh my god.
Well, I guess I don't want to be like, bull in a china shop here, but like it was shocking to my sensibilities that they would keep what was effectively, and again, I'm going to be crass, a corpse.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Next to a newborn.
Yep.
And I guess I don't know if perhaps it's not as like
was that a cultural thing? Is that a New Zealand thing? Is that something that they did just for the
movie?
The movie, because it was convenient, because it helped them tell the story, because it was a very pivotal scene where he's basically like lamenting the death of his grandson.
Yeah, was the baby corpse a plot device, or was that just how they do things?
Yeah, right, exactly.
It was provocative nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so he's like sort of, mourning over his grandson, and the granddaughter is crying, and the grandmother picks her up and he says, "Get her out of here." And so the grandmother leaves with the newborn baby girl, Paikia, and she's just outside the door, and the girl's still crying, and the grandfather comes out all pissed off. I can't lament appropriately because the baby's crying outside the door. And the grandmother says an awesome line, which is, "Before I leave with her, you will acknowledge your newborn baby granddaughter," and hands her to him. And she immediately stops crying, and she says, "See, she likes you." And then he hands her back in a very gruff fashion and says, "Get her out of here," and then goes back in.
I think there's like a split second. They do stretch it out, I think, just long enough to like... The grandfather's character in this movie is probably the most complex of any character. And I personally felt like they stretched that scene out just long enough to like suss out that like he loves her, but like it didn't take too long for him to switch back into his mode, where he was dismissive. Like, I think throughout this movie, he shows that he has affection and he does love his granddaughter, but...
He can't code switch appropriately from traditionalism to realism without him feeling like he's not acknowledging his history and culture.
Yeah.
By him acknowledging his granddaughter as Paikia, he is throwing away all of his history, his culture, and his people's story.
Yeah, he's so blinded by his culture that it doesn't allow him to love his granddaughter in the way that he should and the way that she needs.
And by the same token, if he acknowledges that he loves his granddaughter, he's throwing all of that to the wind.
But I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like, I think one thing that's like definitely kind of damning for his character is like there is nothing precluding him from loving her. And while he does love her, and that's evident in his actions, it is not evident in his words or the way he, like, openly treats her. You know, like, he does things that let you know, like, okay, he loves her, but he is immensely cruel with his words, with his, like, you know, with how he treats her, both in public and in private. And nothing in his culture, nothing in his tradition would preclude him from loving his granddaughter.
No.
The way he treats her is born out of his resentment that he thinks she shortchanged his culture, his tradition, his people, which he wants nothing more than to save. He thinks her birth fucked all that up.
Yeah.
And he's upset about it. And so every time he looks at her, he sees the death of his own people.
Yeah.
And, like, while I get that he doesn't want to acknowledge her as Pykia, the dissonance goes too far.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just that he's not acknowledging her as Pykia. It's not just that he's not acknowledging her as the new leader of, you know, his tribe. It's that he's doing that and resenting her for her existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's why I say that his character was so complex, is I felt like they did belabor that scene just long enough that when I'm watching it, having never seen this movie before, I interpreted that he had a connection for a moment, that he softened for a moment before he switched back in. And
that's interesting. I don't remember that, but it tracks with the character. It tracks with everything that you see later on, for sure. So
yeah,
if you saw that, I definitely believe you.
Yeah, it was my interpretation in that moment that, like, when he embraced, or rather when he had the baby thrust upon him, that he held it and he did
love it for a second.
Yeah, that he did soften for a moment before he switched back into his mode.
And it was almost as if he was like, yes, this is my granddaughter, this is my progeny, but she's not the leader of my people.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm going to give her back and acknowledge the loss of the leader of my people.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of borne out throughout the movie, like you were saying. You know, throughout the movie, he's giving her rides to school. You know,
yeah, he picks her up from school on his bike every day for 10 years.
Yeah, so we should talk about that. So basically, like, after this, like,
it jumps forward.
After this fight that the grandfather and the father have, the father, he's a Maori artist. And so he does a lot of, like, woodwork, and he does a lot of, like, sort of, like, traditional carvings and stuff like that.
Pottery and stuff.
Pottery.
Yeah.
I think he really kind of runs the gambit of Maori artistry. And he is kind of absent, but he's taking his work international, which is also pretty cool. Like, you know, just from, like, an objective sense, it's kind of neat that he's getting shows in galleries in, like, Germany and shit like that.
And he's doing so to provide for his daughter. I mean,
yes,
he's sending money home so that
Yep.
he can support his child. He's not a deadbeat.
And this is what he knows. Right? He's, you know, you don't stay in a place where there is the greatest concentration of Maori artists in the world and make a name or a living for yourself, typically, like, as a Maori artist. But if you go to Germany, you might be able to...
Yeah, they have no exposure to Maori artists.
You might be able to really make that work as a career path. And, you know, so, yes, it's complicated. It's a single-person diaspora, basically, right? He moved away to do the thing that he knows how to do in order to provide. But that also meant that he was absent for 10 years of her life.
Yeah.
And she lived with her grandparents, which was challenging, to say the least. She had to live with the constant scorn of her grandfather and the resentment that her grandfather felt against her.
And the daily reminder that she was not the one that was supposed to be born.
Yeah.
But it's mixed with, like a weird, like, a love, too, though.
He begrudgingly loved her.
Well,
In the way that you can't not love a well-mannered child that lives in your house.
Right, but, like, you don't pick a child up from school on your bicycle every day
for a decade.
Yeah, like, that's why I felt like his character was so, like, nuanced and interesting, is that, like, he loved her more than anything in the world, but he also despised her.
Yeah, he didn't want to love her. He did, but he didn't want to.
But it was really fascinating.
That's kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucked up to say, I do not want to love you, especially when it's a child, but you do anyway.
Yeah. And I think a part of that is he knew that his grandchild was supposed to be the future leader of his tribe. And the grandchild that he ended up with was nothing more than just your regular, average, run-of-the-mill grandchild. And so he loved her because she was his grandchild, but he didn't appreciate or like her and didn't respect her.
And I'm going to go one step further here. So something that was like heavily exhibited in this movie with this specific relationship in reverse with the granddaughter, I think is something that you actually see a lot more frequently in real life. As far as like the I don't want to love you, but I do, is the reverse. Children loving their parents when they have no reason to love their parents. Their parents are horrible, abusive, absent, whatever it happened, to pick your poison for like bad parenting. And you see kids time and time again, how frustrated they are, how much they don't want to care for their parents, but there's no stopping it. I still seek my parents' approval. I still seek their love and their affection. And you see that a lot with Paikya and her grandfather. And that's, I think, typically the way it's portrayed, and I think that's typically the way I've seen it sort of borne out in real life. But in this movie, there is that interesting, like, reverse. Like, typically, there's no reason for a grandfather to, like, not want to love their grandchild. That's a very rare circumstance.
Yeah.
But in this circumstance, he does. He wants to hate her, but he can't. He does still love her. And I think it's interesting that, like, that relationship exists in sort of that reciprocal way, but it's typically one directional in my experience, right?
But in this case, she adores and worships her grandfather.
Right. She seeks his approval.
Despite the fact that his words and, everything he says basically bemoan her existence. Mm-hmm. She's like, he doesn't mean it. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like, he's my Paku. Like, he's my grandfather. It's okay. I forgive him.
Right. But, like, it's almost like she speaks beyond her years, and, like, she seems to, like, understand that, like, he has to reject her in these specific contexts. It's very interesting.
She is as much a slave to traditionalism as he is, and she loves her people and her culture as much as he does. And so in that way, she sort of, like, accepts and forgives all of the horrible things that he does and says to her as basically just a byproduct of the way things are or should be.
Yeah.
Which is immensely fucked up.
Because at multiple points she acknowledges she was not the one that was supposed to survive that day, but she did.
Yeah.
So she's saddled with the burden of, I'm a constant reminder of the great loss that my would-be brother was to my people.
Yeah. So her grandmother is very nurturing, a little apologetic as far as the grandfather's behavior is concerned, but she's supportive. And
she also doesn't take any of Pakya's shit.
She does not. But at one point in the movie, she does say, like, I let him think that he's in charge. Yeah. Which, is awesome and is funny, but at the same time is also very enabling to his more, like, adolescent predilections, like his outbursts and some of the cruel things he says. Somebody probably needs to just say, like, fuck you, you are not allowed to talk to people like that.
Yeah, but I think perhaps this is a dynamic that plays out broadly for all eternity. You've got people who need to feel like they have control, and then you have people who have a more well-rounded sense of reality who allow those people to continue their imaginative authority. I feel like this dynamic has just played out for eternity.
Yeah, and the way you just put that, you could make the argument that, like, by enabling him, by allowing him to do that, it did encourage him to, like, seek salvation for his people, and it pushed him to preserve the culture. And maybe his motives weren't the purest in that, like, he was the leader and he wanted to do things his way, but it still got the job done, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she's 12 years old, and her father comes back for a school play and catches the end of it and kind of...
He brings word that I don't think he's married, but...
He's seeing someone.
She's pregnant. This rubs Koro the wrong way.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, he basically shuts the whole thing down. Like, he invites the school teacher over so that the school teacher can date his son. And
so awkward.
He's like, you're going to start this presentation of your work from the beginning, and he goes back too far to see a slide of Anna, who's this German woman that he's since impregnated, and he's like, oh yeah, by the way, she's pregnant and we're expecting our first child. And Koro's like, well, Time to
hit that old dusty trail.
time to call it a night.
It's so awkward because he tells his son to not his son, his other son.
He's got two sons.
Yeah.
The older one is Paikya's father, who's been in Germany and doing his work. And then there's a younger son,
Rawiri,
who has doesn't really do much. He helps out, he's supportive, but I think is probably unemployed.
Right. But within 5 minutes of him bringing this teacher to their intimate personal family presentation, he immediately says, all right, take her back to town. It's this
oh god,
really awkward.
all the air out of the room type situation.
Yeah.
And they end up having a heart-to-heart, which is actually one of my quotes that I think gets at what Mark is talking about with the sort of dynamism and complexity of the grandfather. Is they're arguing, and he's talking about the son going to Germany and doing his art, and he says, you've got the privileges, but don't forget you've got the obligations. And, I mean, there's probably many layers to this, but he was speaking, I think, specifically about, you learned the traditional Maori techniques for wood carving, for making this art, for doing this stuff. You have the obligation to come back here and pass that on to the next generation. And it doesn't end there. You also, I think, buried in there is, you also have the obligation to provide me with a suitable heir and savior to our people, yada, yada, yada. But the deeper stuff aside, it was an interesting scene because I feel like it really showed the balance between the two perspectives. The son wanted to live his own life. He wanted to get his work out into the world and sort of share Maori culture, more widely.
On his terms.
On his terms, exactly. And he wanted to go to Germany and live in Germany and do his thing and, all this stuff. And that's commendable in many respects. The grandfather's perspective was very much it is your duty to preserve the culture. There were many people who are born into a culture and still don't get to experience that culture. That, the cultural pieces die with the generation above them. And he's it is your responsibility, it is your duty, it is your obligation to pass on what you've learned from the masters before you, to the next generation. And that's a pretty compelling argument, too. And so, even though I think the grandfather, in many respects, is villainous in this movie...
He's vilified, for sure.
In many respects, this interaction, I think, is the most on terms, or sort of the most equal between the two sides of traditionalism warring with new thoughts, new ways, new perspectives. It is the most balanced perspective given on those two things, where I would say truly in the middle of what these two people are talking about is probably the right path, and is probably the path that the writer and director were aiming for, is right in the middle of these two things. And then the grandfather sort of ends up skewing way far to one side. And I would argue the father did too in many respects, because he sort of left after that.
Yeah.
So I think they both sort of got close and then polarized again and then left. And it's right in the middle where I think everybody was seeking resolution.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, because the father is all about promoting Maori culture and going out into the world and exposing them to that. The grandfather is all about rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard labor of preserving the culture as it was written. And both of which, I think that the message in this movie, if there is a message, I don't know, is that neither path is right.
Neither path is wrong.
Yeah, you have to be open to new ideas, and you also have to stick to your roots, both of which conflict with the father and the grandfather's MO.
You can't be too far one way or the other. Because I think the father just... I think, we've talked about him wanting to go promote Maori culture and all that stuff, and I think there's probably some truth in that, but I think...
He was running from it while he was doing it.
I think in many respects, he wanted to create art. He only knew how to create Maori art because that's how he grew up and that's how he was trained. But I think I think that guy would have been perfectly happy making any kind of art.
Yeah.
If he had been trained a different way. And I think he just wanted to live his life. And I don't think he wanted to live it there largely because of his father.
And because of the reminder that, he lost his wife.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. The reminder of his dead wife and dead son. And so, I think, I don't want to give the guy too much credit about, advertising Maori culture sort of a broad I don't think that was necessarily his motivation. I think that was a consequence of where he grew up.
And he was called out for that, too.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the grandfather actually in that same scene says something like, he's like, hey, did you even look at my works? And he says, works, it's souvenirs. Which
isn't work.
Which is so cutting. Yeah. Like, that's so fucking horrible to say to somebody who's poured their life into making this stuff. But
I think it's true to the character, though.
It's very true to the character, and I think it also it tries to illustrate the point that, like, the son wants to leave. He wants to live his own life. He wants to live a modern life independent of his roots and his culture and his
responsibilities.
And in some ways his responsibilities, his obligations. And the grandfather wants to change nothing, wants to not be flexible or adaptable or invite anything new, and wants to live only by the old ways. Like, he already knows where that leads. Like, he sees the culture shriveling. And this, again, we're saying all of this, like, the culture shriveling. That's the way it's depicted in the movie. I don't think that is necessarily the case in New Zealand. I think Maori culture is very well represented in New Zealand and incorporated well.
But I don't want to let the dad off the hook. Like, he does have responsibilities to his...
Oh, no, not letting him off the hook. No, he's got responsibilities to his daughter, and he's got responsibilities to his culture. I mean, because that's the thing, is, like, again, it's portrayed like Maori culture is, like, shriveling in this movie, and in many respects, any type of cultural minority is always sort of at bay, at war with the whatever
endangered species,
whatever the dominant culture is. I mean, like, I know in Scotland, like, years and years and years, Gaelic was not allowed to be spoken or taught. And in order to revive that, you have to fight. You have to really, like, they got laws passed where, like, road signs have to be in Gaelic first. I know they've done this in Ireland as well. There are Gaelic schools, there are bilingual schools, there are, to make sure that this stuff gets preserved, gets passed on, that kind of thing. You do have to fight to make sure that the culture persists. But that doesn't mean that the culture is, like, going to disappear tomorrow, kind of thing, which I think in some respects this movie sort of depicts it that way. But to be fair, maybe they were trying to play at an important sense of urgency, right?
It's still a movie. At the end of the day, it's a movie.
So Grandpa Koro, shortly after this scene, there's a little bit of exposition, but the nuts and bolts of it is he tells Nani, his wife, to gather the firstborns. Basically, all of the firstborn male children of the entire tribe, village, whatever you want to call it.
It didn't work out for Egypt, but we'll see how it works out here.
Yeah. That
was a dark joke.
Yeah. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that, and it threw me off a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, so gathering the firstborns, not to kill, but to teach. Kind of the opposite of what happened in Egypt. So Koro, he's like, hey, gather the firstborns because I'm going to teach y'all a lesson.
I'm going to learn you some stuff.
You going to learn today. It fucking hurt.
It's kind of like his Hail Mary attempt to, like, pass on his legacy when he feels like his own bloodline is not sufficient to do it. He's like, I'm going to go fishing for somebody else who can carry it on. Because
pick up the torch.
Yeah, it's more important to him.
Also, we actually had a discussion about this while we were watching the movie, but they never explicitly name him chief or leader or anything like that. However, he is absolutely the de facto cultural and sort of tribal leader in this area, even though it's not explicitly stated.
Everyone looks to Koro for everything.
Which is again why I think they were expecting the next leader to come from his line.
Yep.
And why what Mark was just saying, like, when he began to sort of, like, doubt and abandon that prospect, he decided to cast a wider net and say, like, well, if it's got to go to another family or another lineage, I better figure out which firstborns are, sort of most likely to be able to be the next leader.
Yeah. And that kind of segues into, in no way is this a montage, but I feel like we can kind of, like, jump through some of these scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Rocky training sequence.
Yeah. He's teaching them how to use the staff and
the taiaha.
Taiaha, I'm not familiar, but it's
a bow staff.
Yeah.
He opens a school.
Yeah.
He opens a cultural school basically to train the firstborn male children into being leaders. They teach them the haka. They teach them how to use the taiaha. They teach them bits about the culture that are unfortunately closely guarded secrets. I know like a lot of aspects of culture, you sort of, you want that intrigue, that mysticism, but by and large, cultures can live and die by how closely they guard their secrets, because if you guard them too closely, then the culture is dead.
Yeah.
And so he's opening up a little bit, and this will tie into something that happens later with the main character, with the girl.
It goes even deeper than him just opening a school. He opened a school for the firstborns to learn about their culture in the original school where their ancestors learned about their culture. Like, this is the one spot on their entire land, their entire existence, that is solely dedicated to their history and culture. So he's like, I am going to steep these boys in their heritage like a good English tea.
Yeah, I don't think that, like, holy site is the right way to, like, describe it, but it is definitely a very significant meeting place for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination, like, cultural center meets recreational center.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the impression that, like, the carvings, have, like, deep significance. I mean, when the father returns, he makes a point to acknowledge.
I think he may have done some of those.
Yeah, he touches them. Like, there's a very, like, intentional acknowledgement of the architecture of that structure.
And he speaks to them and chants to them.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Paikia is basically trying to participate. Her grandfather wants none of that.
Because she's a girl.
That's exactly right. She is a girl, and that is it, and there's nothing else to be said.
That's the movie.
Basically, yeah. It's all just, she is a girl. And so she, again, being a girl, but also, and more importantly, being a leader, decides that is insufficient. This is something that I want to do. This is something that I'm capable of. This is something that I will do. And so she sort of, like, in many different ways, goes about learning these things, peeking through windows, watching from a distance and trying to mimic movements, when they're doing things like with the taiaha.
And then she finds out that her uncle Rawiri was a legendary TOEF fighter and had won trophies for wielding the taiaha.
As her grandmother says, I think she says...
Before he got fat and ugly.
Before he got fat and ugly, and then she said he was a bit of a, what did she say? Hot rod, with the taiaha, and a bit of a hot rod.
Yeah,
and she said he was beautiful. And then one of my favorites. What happened? I don't know.
He got fat.
He got fat and ugly, man.
Yeah,
and it happens to the best of us.
Fat may be descriptive, but that man is not ugly by any stretch of the imagination.
Beautiful eyes.
His eyes are stunning. He's got these like sea green eyes that are just, you don't see them very well in the beginning of the movie, and then there is a scene where he is basically like looking, he's in a house but he's looking into a light source, and it just illuminates
his face and you see his eyes, and it's just like,
yeah, they're very thirsty for this man.
Just gorgeous eyes. Also, definitely, like, I think while a more rotund individual, he definitely gives the impression of a person who, like, whilst rounder, is more fit.
I would call him stout.
Yeah, I think, like, I don't mean to intentionally compare him to a sumo wrestler, because sumo wrestlers are obviously big, but, like, the way sumo wrestlers train, they are athletic underneath what they've got.
Oh, he's fat strong, for sure.
And he seems that way. He seems like the kind of guy who, like, okay, he's big, he's got some extra poundage, but, like, if that dude, decided to, like, play a sport, and not even necessarily, like, I'm not saying he's a linebacker. I'm saying that dude decided to pick up golf. I get the sense that he'd be very good at it.
Yeah.
He's athletic. But just athletic with some heft.
And you get to see that. So he kind of does a haka with his taiaha to show Paikia the fundamentals of toe fighting. And it's very much a ceremonial, like, somewhere between Tai Chi and...
It's like a kata.
Yeah, it's like a kata, basically. So he does this ceremonial bit with the taiaha where he's extending his tongue and widening his eyes and grunting and yelling and doing these practiced movements that he probably hasn't done in about 20 years. but still knows like the back of his hand. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear that this was a very important moment in his personal history.
And so he trains her up, and in addition to sort of her, peeking around the corners, and she already knows a great deal because she lived with her grandparents for 12 years.
There's also kind of an amusing scene right after that, because he gets inspired by teaching Paikia the fundamentals of toe fighting, and you see him jogging on the beach in a hoodie, running right past Koro, and Koro looks and is visibly confused to see his fat, ugly son just running on the beach, and he's like, "Hey, Dad," and then just keeps going.
Which I think, actually, that's a really beautiful scene for, multiple reasons. Is, I think... Okay, so the through line of this movie, if you want the top notes of this movie, it's girl is born when grandfather wants a boy, and he doesn't let her participate, but she is definitely the person who can and should be the next leader of their people.
Absolutely.
That is the top notes. And I think that scene specifically is, in my opinion, the turning point where you start to see her actions influence other members of the community, starting with her uncle, and start to push them towards bettering themselves.
Yeah.
She early in the film, she says things to people like, you shouldn't smoke, Maori women shouldn't smoke because it's bad for your health and, it'll harm our reproduction and blah, blah, blah. And she's a little bossy, but she's definitely very clearly elevating the needs of her people. Mm-hmm. And she's trying to encourage people to do things that are good for them, good for the culture, good for everybody. And this is the first scene where you really see that take effect in a real way, is her interest in learning the Taiaha inspires her uncle to basically, start working on his personal health. And he was, and I actually wrote this down, that the brother and his girlfriend are great examples of complex characters because they have a shit ton of flaws. They are clearly, very into drug use. They hang around with what can only be described as a seedy crowd, but at no point in the movie do you get a sense that they are not good people. They are good people, and they basically just don't have anything to do. Right. They are just sort of they're bored in many respects.
Yeah.
And her presence gives him purpose. And so that whole he got fat and blah, blah, blah. And it's why? It's I don't know. And it's the answer to that is probably he didn't have purpose because he was the second son in a family that only prioritized the first son. So he got bored and he got lazy and he did nothing but smoke weed and pack on the pounds. And now suddenly there is this young girl who is inspiring people and saying, I want to know more about my culture. I want to know more about how to do this. And her uncle, went up into his mind attic and is pulling out the bubble-wrapped Christmas ornaments from his past, saying, I am going to relearn the Taiaha, and I'm going to teach you, and I'm going to get in shape, and I'm going to do this stuff. And it's amazing to watch the inspiration sort of take root.
Yeah, and it's such a small scene, but it packs so much of a punch, because you see him, joyously exercising on the beach, I'm going to get in shape,
yeah.
I'm going to do better for myself. And he runs past his dad very clearly on purpose.
Right.
Very clearly on purpose.
And when he's doing it, when he's using the Taiaha, his girlfriend and a couple of his friends are watching him do it, and they're fucking into it. They're hell yeah, do it. Oh shit, I didn't know you could do that.
At first they're kind of laughing. They're oh my god, Rawiri, what are you doing? And then later on, you see him do it one or two more times, and they're yeah, man,
fucking get it.
And I think that in some ways that was a hint to, it's not a prophecy, maybe, but the grandpa,
pretty damn close. Yeah,
felt like there was going to be someone who came along that united the tribe and brought them to an objectively better position. Mm-hmm. And his lazy son, the grandpa's lazy son, is now working out. He's now practicing his heritage. So I think in some ways it was kind of just a hint to the girl's influence is already showing, really. And I don't know if it was meant to be so poignant, but that's what I interpreted from it.
Mm-hmm. And it was as difficult as this movie can be to watch because of watching the way the grandfather treat his granddaughter again and again and again. It's fucking infuriating. Scenes like that are equally as inspiring as the other scenes are infuriating. You're watching it and you're fuck yeah, like he's getting back into his culture, and his priorities are now like bringing this back up and doing it again and teaching his niece, who he cares deeply about. So again, it kind of I tell me if you disagree, but I think throughout this, like these next couple scenes, it kind of waffles back and forth between her trying and her grandfather sort of like trying to stop her, and it ultimately culminates in her getting into a small tiff with a boy, Hamey, who you could very clearly tell the grandfather favored as the next leader. And she beat him with the Taiaha, and the grandfather lost his shit and basically kicked her out of the house. And so she had to go and live with her uncle and his girlfriend in their not-so-nice, rundown house.
And it goes beyond the fact that, like, he had explicitly forbade her from doing this. But more than that, he was like, you don't realize, like, what you've done is broken a sacred line of all of these people, all of these ancestors that have done exactly as they are told and exactly as they are expected to. And you, a girl, have done this, and that is explicitly forbidden, and you've broken that. And no one can repair that.
Which again, like, I think gets to, you know, I wrote this down too, is like, as far as evaluation of cultural tradition, it's always important to, like, you know, in my opinion, you know, trained as an anthropologist, like, tradition is important, culture is important, but that does not mean that you follow it blindly and don't examine it for toxic traits. And, like, if you want a better example of toxic masculinity and misogyny, what the grandfather was exhibiting, you need look no further than that. And his lack of perspective led to him almost overlooking what was the obvious choice for the next leader of their people.
Yeah.
Because his traditions wouldn't allow him to look any further. So again, back to that, like, middle road between what the father was doing, being extremely progressive, but to his detriment, leaving his, in many respects, his culture in his rearview mirror,
being
and
distantly progressive.
Yeah,
yeah.
And what the grandfather was doing, holding so tightly to his traditions that he couldn't question them.
Yeah. He was staring at a microcosm without observing all of the variables.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle there is
Paikia.
What I think all of us would agree is the correct path, and what I think the author and director are definitely interested in seeing as the correct path.
Yeah, this movie was really about the internal struggle that the grandfather went through in order to, like, grow. You know, how do you have such an old character who is so established in their routines and habits grow and change? And that, I feel like, was the meat and potatoes of this movie, is just slowly chipping away at his expectations. I don't know. I feel like we can kind of jump through the middle portion of this movie a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of at the end, right? Like, or close to the end. I think, like, the next thing is, because there's that sort of montage, right? There is a quick scene when he's trying to choose the next leader.
You're talking about the boat scene?
Yeah.
Yeah, he throws it's a whale's tooth?
It's a whale tooth,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Into the ocean, into the water, while he's got all of his students in the boat with him.
All except for Hammy.
Yeah. And many of them jump out of the boat to try to find this tooth that he's thrown in. You know, his instruction was to just bring it back to him, and the person who brought it back to him was going to be, I guess, the new chief. So you could definitely tell that in this action, when he's on the boat with the other students, that there is some cultural significance to this exercise. That the one who brought back this whale tooth certainly
in strongest contention for the
obvious choice.
Yeah, for the one who is going to, like, unite the community. And none of them were able to bring it back, you know. There's a scene kind of later on where Paikia and her uncle and just her family, they were in a boat, and she kind of casually sort of, like, asks where this event had taken place. And the uncle kind of points to, it was right over there. And she just kind of casually says, all right, I'm going to go get it. And she jumps out of the boat, and it's a longer scene, but she ends up bringing back the tooth. And
it's kind of funny too, because it's like the uncle, his girlfriend, and their two friends who are sort of similar in disposition. And the girlfriend looks at the uncle and goes, "She's been gone a long time. She's been underwater for a long time." And he says something like, "Yeah, she's great." And then, like, you see his eyes, like, it starts to percolate, and he goes, "Oh, You meant she might be drowned. So he jumps in the water.
And he resurfaces like 8 times, and she hasn't shown up once. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, she shows up on the back of the boat and throws a lobster down on the boat. She's like, hey, this is for Koro's tea. Oh, also, I found this. And just drops the whale tooth. Like, casually, oh, by the way.
Okay, hang on. Follow me here. Drop the whale tooth?
I'd say, yeah.
Is that a band name, or is that like Rock the Casbah? Is that a song?
Rock the Casbah.
Drop the whale tooth.
Drop the whale tooth. Drop the whale tooth.
Whale Tooth. New band name.
All right.
Just whale tooth?
Teeth? Whale teeth?
No, that was singular.
I
I'm just want to drop the whale tooth.
So
I feel like that's like rock. All right,
I
I'm gonna put drop the whale tooth as a song.
I feel like the band name could be the Maori word for whale tooth, which is Wasesi.
Okay.
If I tried to pronounce that, I'd probably butcher it.
Wasesi.
Yes.
Okay. If you read it, you would definitely butcher it.
Fair enough. Anyhow,
So she gets them teeths back.
gets the teeth.
And it leads into what is one of the most difficult scenes to watch in cinematic history. This scene for me, so one of my favorite things to do as like a total cinephile, I ask people, top 5, whatever, right? But I'll lead with top 5 saddest scenes in any movie ever. This scene for me, while I would not put it in my top 5, is probably in my top 15. Like, top 5 includes, like, Artax sinking into the swamps of sadness in the Neverending Story. Let's see. The old man giving his wife one last kiss in Titanic as the water rushes into the room.
The opening scene of Up, perhaps?
You know what? Very sad. That's not on my list, but I think that would be on a lot of people's list. So that's a good answer. Also, another one that fucking slays me, like, brings me to tears, is, did you guys ever see Never Been Kissed?
Yeah.
When she gets egged, she gets like set up thinking that she's going to the prom with the most popular guy, and he like pops out of the limo and eggs her.
Fucking John Hughes, man.
That scene turns my stomach over so bad. Anyway, this scene, basically, Paikya invites her grandfather, who has basically, after the boys failed to return the tooth, he basically pulls him inside himself, and he lays in bed, and he becomes massively depressed, and basically believes that the death of his people and his culture are nigh.
Inevitable.
Yeah. And she, unrelentingly, even after how horribly he's treated her, is still trying to get in touch with him and still trying to connect with him. She gives him a special invitation to her, like, some school event. And then he doesn't show up at the beginning, and he, about halfway through, decides he's going to go, gets his suit on, and then gets distracted because a whole bunch of whales have become beached.
Yeah,
However,
he walks the shoreline.
Yeah.
Well, he, like, as I recall,
he has a Spidey sense moment.
Yeah, exactly. He, like, leaves, and his back is to the beach, and he sort of, like, pauses, and then turns around and sees a beached whale, goes down to it, and then looks up, and there's, like,
10 more
all over the beach. Meanwhile, this is so upsetting. It's hard to even describe, but basically, meanwhile, she does her school play thing, which is really awesome, and then it turns out that she won a writing competition, not only at her school, but also at, like, all the other schools in the area, right? Their district. And
she has that special tribute.
Yeah, it's like a speech contest, and she ends up delivering this speech about her grandfather and the preservation of her culture. But actually, she basically does a monologue about this middle way that we've been discussing, right? Like, I love my culture, I love my people, and I love that my grandfather has preserved these things and pushed for them to remain, but we need to be open and understanding. And she's got this bit about, like, we need a lot of leaders, not just one. And those leaders don't just have to be men. And we need to open our eyes to the possibility that our culture, we can preserve it and let it change.
Because sometimes a leader gets tired.
Yeah, and she gives like a really good analogy to their origin story with the OG Paikya.
Yeah, she goes into the entire backstory of the history of her name, and then she, explains.
Even he got tired.
Yeah.
And he had to call for the Ancient Ones to help him.
Even Paikya got tired, and he chanted for the Ancient Ones to come help him, and this is what he chanted. And then she goes on to recite the chant in Maori and, continues on through, like, the entire time she is just choking back tears and trying not to sob openly on stage.
I mean, not even choking back. I mean, she is just...
She's leaking.
Tears are just pouring down her face, and she is...
It's a very, very difficult scene.
It's honestly, like, that's the most difficult part, is, like, it's touching, and it's inspiring, and it's amazing, but it's delivered through this 12-year-old girl who is pouring tears, and her voice is cracking, and she's trying to stay strong on stage while she is just crying and looking at the empty chair where her grandfather was supposed to be. Oh my God.
Like, it physically hurts to watch
that. It does. That's a perfect way of putting it. It's fucking, like, you're watching it and you're like, I want to do anything but watch this right now.
I just want to hug that little girl and tell her that everything's going to be okay.
But that's the mark of a good drama.
It is.
Like, I want to fucking turn it off because this hurts to watch. Mm-hmm. But, like, that's just a sign that you're invested.
Which is all the more reason not to turn it off.
Like, right, exactly. Yeah. Like Mark said, I want to see the resolution.
Yep.
Like, this hurts too much to not...
It pisses me off so much, I have to know.
Yep.
So...
The next scene is them basically discovering...
The whales.
That the grandfather's been with the whales the whole time, and they need to figure out how to save them.
Yep.
And Uncle Rawiri comes in, and he's like, you need to see this, come down to the beach. And, like, everybody's at the house.
Yep.
Because that's just kind of the dynamic that they run. Everybody just sort of, like, they have an open door policy thing. So Rawiri comes down to the beach, and everybody, like, the entire village is there. And they see, like, a dozen beached whales. And in Maori, Koro says, who is to blame? You know, and it's implied that his granddaughter is the one to blame.
It totally is.
It's not explicit, but it is.
Yeah.
We know who it is.
See, I interpreted that as he is to blame for being so stuck in his ways.
No, but he hadn't realized the error of his ways at this point.
Right, but my interpretation as the viewer was that he was confronting...
Like, you're supposed to be sitting there watching it going like, you! Like, get off!
Well, yeah. No, and maybe there's some nuance there, but, like, my interpretation as the viewer was that he thought it was his granddaughter, but in reality it was him who was too stubborn to expand his notion of the next generation was going to be.
And that's 100% correct in my opinion. He's looking at this situation going, who is to blame? Because he knows, like, his granddaughter's the one that broke the line. His granddaughter's the one that broke the rules. His granddaughter is the reason that his people don't have a leader. So he's like, this is her fault. Mm-hmm. But in reality, he is so far removed from the situation and at the same time so heavily invested in the situation that he can't look at himself with that same scope and say, oh, I've been so stubborn and so blind to the truth. I've been blindly following tradition so hard that the truth was in front of me the whole time and I just can't see it. Meanwhile, Paikea isn't even allowed to go down to the beach to help because she's a girl. So all of the men are attaching this tow rope and this tractor trailer
to be fair, this one I think may have been less about being a girl and more about being a
brute strength.
I think it may have been more about being a kid because there were a lot of women there.
Yeah. So all of the men are trying to haul this giant whale to turn it around so that they can send him back out to sea because the whale's still breathing. I mean, he's still blowing out his blowhole. So band name I call it.
Oh damn it! I was gonna get it blowing out his blowhole.
And so they're trying and they're pulling and they're running the tractor. The rope breaks. All is lost. The entire village says, let's take a break, regroup. We'll get the whales back in the water.
I think we should mention that, like, they're trying to keep all of the whales alive, and there is one that gets beached a little bit further away, and...
It's clearly the matriarch of the group.
Significantly larger.
It is very obviously a metaphor for the grandfather. Mm-hmm. This whale was clearly the leader of that pod, beached itself, basically in anguish and, like, loss of hope.
Yeah.
And she knows that it wants to die. It wants to just end it because it's so distraught about the plight of, its whale pod, which, track the metaphor, right? Like, it is her grandfather.
And all of the other whales beached themselves after this leader beached itself.
And will not go back in until the leader does.
Yep, and so the entire village knows if they can get this whale back in the water, the rest of them will follow. They try everything, nothing works, so the entire village goes, and they're like, we'll take a break, we'll come back at it, we'll rest up, we'll be strong. So Paikya goes down and bonds with this whale, touches this whale, and essentially kind of like communicates with it, and she decides to climb on top of this whale, and she grabs this nest of barnacle that's like right up on its hump and sits into like a mount position, and suddenly the whale starts like flapping its tail and righting itself and goes back into the water. And this is the line that hit me so hard the first like 2 or 3 times that I watched it, and even now watching it tonight, my 4th or 5th time seeing this movie, it still punches me in the gut. She's riding the whale as the whale goes down into the water, and she says, "I'm not afraid to die."
That was pretty baller.
Like, this is a 12-year-old girl who is named after this mythical progenitor of
whale riding progenitor.
Yeah, and she's like, I'm riding the whale, and she's not afraid, she's not scared, she's not nervous. She knows that she's gonna die if she does this. And she says, I'm not afraid to die, and then she just lets go and floats off into nowhere.
Yeah, the next time we see her, she is, like, almost comatose in a bed.
Yeah.
Another thing that I do want to point out about that scene is, like, I love the fact that scene comes on the heels of, like, her speech in her school, and, like, how she's talking about, like, there needs to be lots of leaders, and there needs to be this and that, and, like, her uncle in that scene, like, fucking owns it.
Oh,
that
yeah.
dude is, like, he is very clearly the leader of the effort to keep the whales alive, and he is going from, basically, like, every whale has, like, 1 to 4 people working on it to try and keep it wet, to try and, make sure it's alive, all this stuff. And he is coordinating this, basically. It's really awesome to see. And he's also, even though the grandfather's the one who called for the rope and the tractor and all this stuff, he was the one who, like, led the charge to, like, get the rope around the whale's tail. And I love the fact that, like, the uncle is very clearly the most evident example of her effect on her people. It starts with him running on the beach and him, picking up the taiaha, which is awesome. But that's him following her. This scene was him becoming a leader because of her.
Right.
And I loved that. And it's this, like, this distribution of, like, we can all pitch in and do this. And it's secondary to the metaphor of, like, the whale being her grandfather and her leading him back into the ocean and inspiring him and giving him hope that the people will continue, the people will survive, the culture will survive. Secondary to that. But I think just as powerful in sort of its own way.
Yeah. So immediately following this scene where she rides the whale into the surf, Nani and Koro are standing on the beach, and for all they know, they've just watched their granddaughter die.
Ugh.
And she walks up to Koro, opens his hand, and just slams the whale tooth into his hand. And he goes, "Which one?" And she looks him dead in the eyes and goes, "What do you mean, which one?" And then just walks away.
Yeah.
Very clearly, like, bitch, this was your granddaughter. The one you've been ignoring for 12 years.
Not one of the boys.
Stop closing your eyes with this. So that takes place. She kind of comes out of her recovery.
Yeah, she's basically in a coma in the hospital.
Yeah.
And it kind of wraps the movie up. There's a quick scene where they're finally taking the boat with significant cultural and family connection to it.
Her father, who is a master Maori craftsman and carver, was building this boat or carving this boat and sort of abandoned the project.
When his wife died.
Yeah. But it was pretty far along. I mean, it was very identifiably a boat.
Yeah.
Even though it was abandoned, you could tell what it was. And it's a very long boat. Definitely a sea-going vessel, not a kind of local jobby. But clearly this boat had been finished.
Yeah.
In the final scene.
So, the climactic bit is, like, the whole village is together. They're all rowing. They're all moving forward.
And they're chanting a haka as they do it.
Yeah. So it's this coming together of community. You know, not that Pica is like this chosen one, but through her influence, she's brought the community together in a way that they haven't in a long time. So it provides like some closure that doesn't like push too far into fantasy. You know, I think that personally, my interpretation is that they were flirting a little bit with fantasy when she mounts the whale and suddenly there's this connection and the whale like rights itself and goes back out to sea. I didn't roll my eyes, but like that kind of took it right up to the threshold of like, okay, what is this?
I think that's the perfect threshold, though, right?
Yeah.
Like it needs to be there.
Yeah, but it didn't go past that.
Yeah.
You know, it grounded itself.
We didn't go all the way to Free Willy.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, one thing I'm just sort of making the connection on right now is like early in the film, she's talking with her father about basically what her grandfather wants. And, you know, she's like, oh, he wants a new leader. And her father says, I think he wants a prophet. And, you know, he wants a sort of, you know, I'm not using this in the universal sense, but in like the culturally specific sense. He wants a Muhammad, you know, a Moses or a Jesus type character to sort of like this one person solves all the problems.
Yep.
Unite and refocus.
Yeah, and like basically what she ends up demonstrating by finally convincing everybody up to and including her grandfather, who is the sort of last domino to fall, she doesn't have to be a prophet. She just has to be a leader, which will topple the cultural hang-ups that previously wouldn't have allowed her to be a leader.
Right.
And allow these other people to take ownership of the proliferation of their culture, like second sons, other girls, young boys who just happen to not be selected as the next leader. It doesn't have to be one person. And the irony is she becomes a leader by demonstrating that many people simultaneously can be leaders. And in that way, actually kind of becomes a prophet.
Yeah. Well, the funniest...
Which is really cool.
The funniest part about it to me, too, is she was the second born and she was a girl.
Oh, yeah. So that kind of wraps it. Man, it was a great movie. I really enjoyed it. So what were some of the standout things? I know for me, like, I really enjoyed the soundtrack of this movie. Like, for whatever reason, like, it jumped out at me, like, and I have no idea, so I'm really kind of jumping out on a ledge here. But some of the songs that they used in this movie, like, the composition, I was very unfamiliar with. So I have to, like, and this is a total shot in the dark, that maybe the director had sourced some of the soundtrack from more regionally specific
Local artists.
Yeah, and I have no idea if that's true or not. I just
it had
know,
that kind of flair.
Yeah, I just know that I was not familiar with this flavor of music before. It was very interesting to me.
For me, what I appreciated about this movie, and I know that a lot of my friends will disagree, but I loved the acting in this movie.
You have friends?
I do.
How long has this been going on?
I didn't want to tell you, but it's been going on for about 20 years now.
Son of a bitch!
I know. I try to keep it close to the vest.
He's not even wearing a vest. You guys can't... He's lying already. He's not even wearing a vest.
Well, maybe if he was wearing a vest, he wouldn't have a broken rib.
Yeah.
That's safety vest.
Coming full circle.
Yeah. That bright orange keeps you safe from impact. But yeah, so...
He says it with such a defeated, like, tone.
Ow.
If only I was wearing orange.
You guys are evil. But for me, I really appreciated the acting because nothing was underacted or overacted. Everything felt like very natural conversations. One exception might have been some of the children in the movie, but to be fair, they're like fucking 10 years old.
But that Pica,
like,
oh my god, that
she was phenomenal.
Where she's like, when she's breaking up, when she's doing the tribute to her grandpa, that was hard to watch.
Yeah.
So, again, there's no Scarlett Johansson's in this movie. There's no Brad Pitts or Robert Downey Jr.'s in this movie.
Yeah, you're saying, like, you know, when your entire cast is made up of people who, by and large, just aren't established actors and actresses.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you would have a hit rate as high as this movie has.
Yeah. And, like, all of the dialogue felt natural and organic. All of the fights felt like real fights that you would experience with family. All of the monologues and one-liners, all of the conversations. Like, in cinema and movies, you get a lot of these really flowery conversations that have, you know, one character speaking for a really long time, and then they say, what do you think? Or, how do you feel? Or, you know what I mean? And there's just this quiet moment of reflection, and then the other person has this nice, long, flowery monologue. That's not normal conversation. People don't talk like that. That's how normal people have conversations. People interject. People start talking before you're done talking. There's weird pauses. There's weird cadences. Nobody in this movie spoke with the same cadence as any other person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. This movie, more than most, I got lost in it. Like, it didn't feel like I was watching a movie anymore. I felt like I was watching...
It was very
people.
immersive.
Yeah. Oh, man, yeah,
No,
I agree.
I totally agree. I agree on the acting. I agree on the soundtrack. I think the writing was superb. I love that this movie, it simultaneously exposes the viewer to and teaches about Maori culture. It's inspiring for both Maori and non-Maori people. And, you're watching that and you're getting, like, fucking jacked up. Mm-hmm. And it's exciting, and I can only imagine that is amplified when it's your culture that's being sort of
the message
beefed
is
up,
universal, but like to see yourself represented.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not gonna, like, my dad's from Scotland, and it's like, I'm not gonna pretend like I don't get fucking, like, worked up when I'm watching Braveheart.
Yeah, like
fucking, it pumps you up, and
I don't have the same experience because my family's English, and I don't get fucking stoked about Downton Abbey or anything. But
no, but I mean, everybody gets pumped up when they watch Braveheart. You don't have to be Scottish.
That's true.
But
it's another layer.
It might not hit you any more or less, but it can hit you maybe a little bit differently if if your exposure is a little bit different.
I get really stoked when I see movies that are based in Seattle.
Well, there you go. Sleepless in Seattle.
Exactly.
And, Jackson's over here, touching himself deeply. And,
I've been sleepless in Seattle many times.
Insomnia is not healthy.
No.
But it is. It's inspiring for both Maori and non-Maori audiences. I'm not Maori. I didn't.
What?
Well, I mean, I'm a little Maori, but.
Okay.
I didn't grow up with that as my cultural background, but I couldn't imagine a Maori person watching this movie and not, at the very least, taking away from it, like, love and appreciation for where they came from, their people, their culture, and saying, like, I want to proliferate this.
Yeah.
And I think for my limited time in New Zealand, I loved the fact that I feel like, at least as compared to other places in the world, Maori culture in New Zealand is elevated and promoted in a very integrated way, and it's exciting and it's engaging. And it makes New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
And it's movies like this. It's media like this. Books, film, television, whatever, music, that can tap into a particular sort of cultural strain and elevate it, that when people have connection to that, hear it, watch it, read it, whatever, can get that bug and go like, fuck yeah, this is my people, or this is a connection I have, and I want to reach back into my past, learn as much as I can, and carry it as far forward into the future as I can. And that's really cool, man. That's really, really cool. And I think this movie did a great job at sort of like doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was there anything that are we ready to move on to maybe things that we didn't like?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. So I kind of already tipped my hat a little bit, and this is a small gripe. I feel like it maybe for the narrative it was almost necessary, but it pulled me out a little bit when she crawls up on top of that whale at the end of the movie and it rights itself. For me, that took what was a wholly grounded story that was steeped in cultural significance, yeah. And took it that one small, maybe half step beyond that to, I hesitate to call it fantasy, but like embellishment. And it took me out just a little bit. But at the same time, I feel like it was narratively solid, for the movie. It did not in any way besmirch anything that I'd seen before. But I think personally, I would have wished that they had found perhaps a more grounded way of establishing her
elevation to status as the new leader.
Yeah. Cultivating her grandfather's respect and uniting the community. But again, it's a small gripe, and I don't know if it would have worked any other way.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to find a criticism, and I'm definitely searching with this movie because I truly enjoyed it. That's all I could offer.
I can't think of a single thing that I don't like about this movie. Like, I wouldn't say that this is the best movie ever made or anything to that effect, but for what this movie is, I don't think there was a single thing that I would change.
Yeah, I feel like when you're like looking for something I did like or didn't like, right? It's like if you put that on a 10-point scale, anything that falls below 5, I might say like, okay, I kind of had an issue with this. You know, anything that falls above, it's like I really don't have an issue with it, even if it's 5.1.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you said, it's like not the greatest movie ever made, but if everything sort of falls over the 5 mark, I really can't ding it on anything. You know, but I'm that's not to say I'm going to give it a 10, but you know, I would say all the elements, you know, sort of stack up over 5. The only thing that, and again, this is both like a knock, but it's also actually like a boon to this movie, is like the movie, it could have been, and I don't mean that in that it should have been. It could have been a little bit more explanatory about aspects of Maori culture and sort of like steep the viewer a little bit more in certain things. But at the same time, and the reason I'm not saying this as it should have been this way, it's pretty awesome to see like an unapologetically Maori movie. Like, we're not going to explain to you every aspect of the thing. This is just us and how we live our lives, and if we say or do a thing that you're unfamiliar with, just take it at face value that that's something that's a piece of us, and we're not going to explain it in the movie, but you can always look it up later, or you can, you know, ask us about it kind of thing. So I think that's both like a knock and a boon, in that it would have been awesome from this perspective of people who want to learn more, know more, even Maori people who want to sort of see it up on screen. But that's really all I've got. I, like you, everything's over, I think, over the 5 mark for me. Do we have any more quotes that we didn't get to?
My quote, it's not like a singular quote, it's more of an interaction. And this is somewhat earlier in the movie. There's just a quick interaction between one of the kids of the community and his father. And he says, you know, see you tonight. You know, like he's excited to see his dad. And the father just kind of says, next couple of days, maybe. And for whatever reason, you know, that jumped out at me, as at that point, the community was breaking apart. There weren't strong ties between fathers and sons. Even the main character, you know, her dad just kind of disappeared in her life. For whatever reason, that jumped out at me.
That was a hard scene to watch.
Yeah.
Because it was a smaller version of her and her grandfather trying to connect, and this was this kid just desperate for his father's attention and approval.
Yeah. And
his dad came for a second.
And he was so excited and so proud that his dad was there to see him.
Yeah.
And then his dad just pieces out again.
Left literally in the middle of the fucking like event.
See you in a couple days, maybe. But I'm sorry, Jackson. Go ahead.
So the one quote that I have was after Paikea gets on the whale and rides out into the surf, she's basically in a coma, and the entire village is like praying that this little girl makes it out. And one of Nani's friends that we've seen throughout the movie says, I've been praying to God about it, and if that little one wakes up, I'm giving up the smokes. And Nani kind of chuckles and goes, she'd like that.
This was also one of the women who was scolded earlier for
smoking, because smoking is hazardous to the reproductive health of Maori women
who are 65 and older.
Yeah.
Was it like the reproductive properties?
Yes.
Or it was some silly.
To which she responds, you'd have to smoke that out of a funny place to affect your reproduction.
So mine was, I can't even remember the context. I think it was when her father, in the beginning of the movie, he was thinking about taking her back to Germany with him. And her grandfather says, take her, she's no use to me. And that, I mean, like, it's not an isolated incident, but I feel like that quote sums up exactly how the grandfather acted and felt towards his granddaughter, and specifically his granddaughter's place in the culture.
So that quote immediately takes place after the slideshow of him displaying his work and sort of dropping the bomb that his German girlfriend Anna is pregnant. And then when Koro says that line, Paikea runs off to her father's boat, which is very obviously like her thinking place. And her father Poro comes out and has that little sit down and is trying to comfort her by like, you know, your grandfather says these things, and she just matter-of-factly says he doesn't mean it.
Yeah, she just forgives him immediately.
Like, immediately. Instantly.
Unequivocally just forgives him.
She's like, it's okay, he doesn't mean it. He just says these things.
That's also, that interaction, that scene is also where he says the whole, like, I don't think he's looking for a leader. I think he's looking for a prophet.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of beautiful that, like, she can recognize that he is so wrapped up in his customs, but, like, she knows him in a more intimate way that, like, she knows that he doesn't mean it.
Yeah.
You know, that he can say these things out of anger or out of
resentment.
Yeah, but she knows where his heart is at, you know. Again, I'll die on this hill. I think that the grandfather is the most complex character and the most interesting person to dissect in this movie.
I hope he dies on that hill and not the hill of libraries not being good.
Yeah.
I'm not actually... You know what? Fine. Hot take, F libraries.
Oh, hang on. Listen up, viewers.
That is us beating his ass.
All right. I'm sorry, libraries. I've spent a lot of good time inside you. You make me happy.
That's not the first time Mark has said that.
Usually not about libraries.
It's not even the first time he's said it in my presence.
That's a spicy take.
That's a spicy meatball.
I'll show you a spicy meatball.
He actually said that right after he
Verbatim.
said that to you.
That's true.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of good time inside you.
Yeah.
Are we Lurdern?
I believe so.
Are we Laura
Dern?
Dern?
Can we rate this beesnatch? All right, I'll rate it.
He's gonna rate it.
All right,
Start us off.
I'm throwing 7.8. It's a little dark. Beached whales.
Yeah, but
It's contextually
it tracks.
Yeah.
You said 7.8.
7.8 beached whales.
I will go 7.4 Taiaha.
Fuck you.
Was that yours?
Yes.
Nice.
Hang on, what's a taiaha again?
It's the staff that
staff.
they use for toe fighting. Well, I am going to go with something that was not explicitly said out loud in the movie, but I do know what it is. 7.2 wasesis, which are whale tooth necklaces.
Waseses?
Wasesis.
Wait, waseses or waseses?
Wasesis.
Waseses. All right.
And what did you say? 7.2.
7.2.
We're all
Pretty tight cluster.
Yeah.
All right. So what we're gonna do is deliver our very first scene score.
Scene score.
Scene score.
Scene
This
score.
is a big thing.
Should we do it lyrically? Scene score.
Ah.
I was looking for a scene score all around. All right. Scene score.
Eh.
How about I lead, you go in, and then you come in.
Okay.
Scene score. We harmonized really well
That
there.
was pretty great.
I think I was a little too close to the mic, but we harmonized well. I know, right?
Blew the F out of that.
Okay, so the scene score. We've described this before. This is our modified score. We take all of the scores that we've given it, and then we modify it based on your familiarity as the listening audience with this movie. If you want to be a part of creating this score, email us at 3, that is the number 3, meninabasement at gmail.com. You can also find both a description of the scene score and also how to sign up for our
Weekly survey?
Yeah, how to sign up for a weekly survey where you will be able to weigh in on your familiarity with upcoming films on our website, which you can find on podbean.com. Just type in 3 Men and a Basement. Okay, the scene score for this movie.
Drum roll, please.
Or should we lead off with the familiarity or no?
Let's go with familiarity first. Save, build the suspense.
Okay, so the familiarity with this movie was about 33%.
It doesn't shock me.
No, it was pretty low. And with the scores that we gave it, our scene score, our adjusted score, is 8.0.
All right.
Which punches high.
Feels good, though.
It's higher than any one of our individual ratings, but I think feels good because it is enhanced by the fact that, like...
I'd never even heard of
It's
this
a
movie.
It's a hidden gem, right?
Yeah.
The
The purpose of the scene score is to, like, capture both the quality of the movie and how well known is it. And this is kind of subjective. I had never even heard of this movie, and I loved it. So,
And
8
see, I
sounds
saw
right.
this movie almost 20 years ago and have seen it 4 or 5 times since.
Yeah, I feel like that was pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
That was pretty good.
Okay. That was our first scene score, guys.
I like that. That was
liked it.
fun.
That was
liked
fun.
it. We should practice harmonizing.
Yeah.
If this doesn't work out, we could join a
Barbershop Quartet.
Or Quintet.
Yes.
Barbershop Quintet.
Who are the other two?
Quintet? Or, fuck.
Trio.
Triptet. Triple? Triple.
Barbershop Trio.
Trio? Don't go trio. It's too common. Something with a t at the end of it.
Triplet.
Barbershop Triplet?
Yeah.
That sounds like a deformed...
I feel like we shouldn't bind ourselves exclusively to barbershops.
Okay.
I feel like we might find it difficult
Salon
to find
triplet?
work.
We could-
Salon we'd have better luck with. Or we could just go like generic, like
Great clips.
hair triplet.
Triplet.
And then do like guest performances at nail salons.
Well, yeah, obviously. If we're
lash
running
bars.
short on work, yeah, sure,
What
absolutely.
about massage?
I don't think they call them massage parlors.
What do they call them?
I don't know, but massage parlor has a definite flavor of happy endings.
Well, that's...
We are the happy ending. Come on.
Yeah, fair.
Did you hear that harmony?
I did. I retract my previous statement.
We
no reticence.
start off with a beat and say, a stranger is touching you. A stranger is touching you. I hope they don't shut you downstairs and make you go. What did we just do?
I kind of liked it. Oh, I don't know if we should cut it out, though. I don't want to. That was for you.
I hate you so much.
Oh,
Jackson-
yeah, that's right. He's broken.
Jackson's in physical pain. All right. Well, on that very lyrical note, that is all for the All Crep Review. Thank you for listening. If you have any ideas for movie reviews, please contact us at 3, that is the number 3, menandabasement@gmail.com. Please be sure to check out YCC and their new song, Drop the Whale Tooth. They are blowing it up. Speaking of blowing...
Drop the Casbah.
Blowing it out is Blowhole.
Drop the whale.
They are touring with YCC. And you can also find us on iTunes, Google Play, wherever you find your podcasts. And until then, I am Colin McLeod.
Mark up here.
Action Jackson.
And we will see you in cyberspace.
Fuck.
Scene score!
Fuck.